I continue my real-time exegesis of the science of logic. And ontology is the doctrine of the determinations of being and of essence. And the way I understand things, when we think about being, we predicate categories. The categories have first been brought to consciousness in Aristotle's work titled the Categories. And Aristotle believed that the categories were, for instance, I use the Kantian categories of unity, plurality, totality, reality, limit, negation, substance and accidents, cause and effect, stuff like that. Aristotle believed that the categories were determinations of the real, of being. They were ontological determinations. So the unity of an object was within the object. For Kant, many centuries later, the categories that he brought forth in a more systematic and organized manner were determinations of the mind, of the higher ego, the transcendental ego. And according to Kant, we had all a transcendental ego which functioned through the mediation of categories, and it must be distinguished from our psychological ego, our individual ego. So for Kant, the categories were determinations of the mind, and he said that he believed that we could not know the things in themselves, how the objects really are. We could only know our own mind and become conscious of the way through which the structure of our mind by logic and aesthetic, which is the sensuous perception of objects, mediates what he calls the thing in itself, which is as Hegel said, the phantom of the object. So for Kant, categories were determinations of the mind. And for Hegel, who also tries to reconciliate both sides, categories were both determinations of ontology and determinations of thought. That's why Hegel's logic is an onto-theological science, namely that the categories are both in reality, in the object, in being, and in the mind, and they are in a dialectical interaction with one another. And according to Hegel, when we have a speculative understanding of things, our mind becomes one with that which we understand, with the world, and this transcendence of self and this unity with the world, or with the other, or with the cosmos, if you will, is what we call mystical. And for Hegel, what is mystical is what he calls speculative. So he says the logical science, which constitutes metaphysic proper, which is proper metaphysics, or purely speculative philosophy. So Hegel's philosophy is speculative, which is another word for mystical. He says that philosophy, which is speculative knowledge, insofar as it must be a science, cannot borrow its method of cognition to any other subordinated science. Philosophy cannot borrow its method of knowing from mathematics by using axioms, definitions, postulates, correlates, and deductions, because what we call science, every science presupposes its object. The physicists believe that there is a physical universe. The mathematicians believe that there is quantity and numbers and space. So the object is already given, and the method of cognition is what we call the epistemology, is borrowed from another field. And in the end, all epistemologies, which are theory of knowledge. What does it mean to know something? What is the difference between opinion and knowledge, between truth and error? Or what do we mean when we say that we are sure of something, or that we believe in something, or that we know something to be true, and stuff like that? Um, every epistemology is founded onto philosophy, and you cannot get rid of philosophy so easily, because every anti-metaphysician possesses unconsciously a metaphysics which dictates him what truth and falsehood are. And when you say that metaphysics is garbage, or is useless, you have to have your own metaphysics which tells you that what is the value of truth and error, for instance. So we are all metaphysicians unconsciously, even the anti-metaphysician scientists and atheists and philosophers. So yeah, Hegel says that philosophy must construct and build its own method of knowledge, and to bring forth the fundamental ground and the justification and the being true of all other derivative and deduced sciences. So philosophy is the highest science, because all other sciences, whether speculative or empirical, must in truth be derived from philosophy. Yeah. And then there's something very important in Hegel. He says that we cannot apply knowledge from the outside by predicating truths about the content, and the ultimate content is being, because every inquiry, every scientific inquiry, or every question is a question about being, or about a part of being. Chemistry is the chemical aspect of being. Psychology is the soul, or the thinking aspect of being. So everything is within being, including the thought of nothing is within being. So Hegel, and that's very important, he says that when we predicate from the outside, we use determinations that we apply onto a determinate being. It's not the proper way of knowing. It is the nature of the content itself. It is being which must self-predicate what it is. He must gives himself his own determination, and in pagan mythology we have the idea that Odin is given himself to himself. And to go into more easier way of expressing, white consciousness. I already talked about it in another video. If you say to a Ukrainian or a Pole or a Finn or a Spanish that he is white, there's a very likelihood that he will not necessarily be aware that he is white. But if you say to a white nationalist that he's white, it's not predicated from the outside. It is himself, through his political, intellectual development, who has predicated to himself his own white consciousness. And white nationalism is a moment in the development of world consciousness. There are other moments, but it's a moment where a part of being, some whites, predicate to themselves, they apply to themselves the knowledge that they are white. It's a moment in the development. And a real white is a white who knows himself to be white. And a real God is a God who knows himself to be God. So yeah, that's the idea that in Hegel, predicates and determinations must not be applied from without, from the exterior, by a subject who knows. It is the content which must self-predicate, which must become conscious of its own self-movement of determination. So it's useless to talk about Odin. It's not useless, but in order to know Odin, Odin must become Odin for himself. He must become conscious of himself, and he can only become conscious of himself in his community, which is the pagan community. And then he says, the understanding, der Verstand, determines and holds firm the determinations. To think is to predicate categories or determinations to an object. Reason, die Vernunft, is negative and dialectical in the sense that it negates the determinations of the understanding, and I will illustrate that. and she dissolves, she washes away, in a way, she molds, she makes disappear the determinations of der Verstand. But reason is positive in a sense that it contains within the universal the particular. So it's a unity of opposite determinations. The understanding says the universal is universal, the particular is particular. Reason understands that it is in the reason of the universal to particularizes itself, and the particular must universalizes itself, and they are in a unity, in a dialectical unity. And I will illustrate this with example that I've already used in other videos. The the left is the left says difference is difference. We must accept the other, the non-whites in the Western countries, because they are different, and they say difference is difference, but actually this is a determination of der Verstand. But actually, when they say this, they say the opposite, because they say that because we are all identical, we are all human beings, we must accept difference. So they say that we must accept difference in the name of identity. And the right says we are different and we want to defend and protect our identity. So the right defends its own identity in the name of a right to difference. And the attempt to reestablish racism in the political field has been called ethno-differentialism. So ethno-differentialism, the right to differentiate one's own group on an ethnic basis, is an identity politics. So this is dialectical, because to oppose identity and difference in their abstraction, to say identity is identity, difference is difference, that's a thinking of der Verstand, because rational thinking shows, and it's a part of the process of the logical development, that identity cannot be thought of without difference, and difference cannot be thought of without identity, that they are in a conceptual unity. And that's why neither the left nor the right are true. They are moments of the development of truth, but the conceptual understanding of politics is to unite left and right. And let me illustrate this. Every political ideology of the past 2 centuries, since the French Revolution, has been an attempt to re-establish the unity which had been broken and disrupted by the French Revolution and the Industrial Revolution. Every ideology from left and right attempted to create a unity of the individual and the collective. And the whole political history of the past 2 centuries, and even before, but let's just take the past 2 centuries, an attempt to solve the contradiction between the freedom and the liberty of the individual and the well-being of the good of the community. And it's a dialectical process. And yeah, so that's what I wanted to say. So I will continue as long as I can, but that was just the exegesis of parts of the preface.